But I think we are just not willing to come to the realization that our idols aren't little statues, but instead our idols are some of these things that we've already discussed. When Moses is getting the Ten Commandments from God on Mount Sinai, what's going on down at the base of the mountain? They are doing exactly what God had just said for them not to do. And it's not the fifth commandment, it's not the 10th commandment. No, this is the very first commandment. And it is this: Thou shalt have no other gods before me. You know why I think God put this first? It's because I think he wanted this to be the foundation that everything else God asks from here on out of you is to assume that he comes first. Welcome back to the Sunday to Society podcast. I'm your host, Riley, where we hope you go from the pews to the public square. We release new episodes every Monday on your favorite podcasting apps, such as Apple Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music, and wherever else you listen to audio podcasts. You can watch the video version of this podcast on YouTube and Spotify. And if you haven't already, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or hit that follow button if you are listening or watching on another platform. And that helps us get the podcast out to even more people. Today, I want us to talk about something that you probably don't hear a whole lot talked about in church. And let me give you a little bit of an opening scenario on what I might be talking about. Let's imagine that you wake up in the morning. What's the first thing that you check in the morning? What do you think about when you're driving during the day? Or what keeps you up at night? What would be absolutely devastating if you lost it tomorrow? And maybe it was any of those things. And maybe it's different things. But what's the thing that you think about the most, or maybe think about in one of these scenarios? Whatever came to your mind in those things, it might be an idol, and you might not even know it. Here's the thing I think we think about when we think of idolatry, at least for me personally. When I think of idolatry, I think of the children of Israel in the Old Testament falling down and worshiping something that was other than God. An example. Remember when the children of Israel are in the wilderness and Moses goes up to Mount Sinai and gets the 10 Commandments from God? But when Moses comes down from Mount Sinai, what does he see the people doing? He sees the people worshiping a golden calf, something that they had made of themselves, saying that this golden calf is what brought us up out of Egypt. And Moses, rightfully so, throws down the tablets, breaks them, and has to get these tablets redone by God. I think that's when our minds think of idolatry. That's a lot of times what we think of. However, what was in those 10 commandments that God had given Moses? It was, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And we think as long as we don't place anything like an idol or another god in front of God, then we're okay. However, what the Bible actually says, and we'll get into this a little bit later, that an idol is anything that takes the place of God in our heart. So anything that you look to for security, significance, comfort, or identity that is not God, then that has become an idol in our life. And so I want us to dig in today to that topic of what type of idols are sitting in your life right now that might not necessarily be made of stone or gold, but are just as real and are just as dangerous. And we'll see what God has to say about that here in just a moment. But first, I do want us to look at what exactly is going on. And the Swiss reformer John Calvin said this. He said that the human heart is an idol factory. This was in the 16th century. And I think a quote like that is even more relevant and more prevalent in our society now than it was in the 16th century. Here's some data on the topic. In 2021, Lifeway Research surveyed 1,000 Protestant pastors across all kinds of different Protestant denominations and asked them what modern idols influence their congregation the most. And there were a couple of answers that came to the top. In fact, the top three answers equivalent for more than 50% of the 1,000 pastors surveyed. Can you take a guess on what the number one answer was? The number one answer, with 30% of the 1,000 pastors asked on their congregation's idol, was straight comfort. Especially if you live in a first world country, we enjoy our comfort, don't we? There's something nice about taking a seat on the couch after a long day at work, putting your feet up, and maybe either reading a book, watching TV or a movie, or something like that. We all like comfort, don't we? In fact, there's really nothing wrong with comfort unless it begins to take the place of God. So 30% of the pastors said that comfort was an idol for their congregation. Control and security came in at second with 20%. So, in just 50% of the votes, comfort, control, and security made up 50% of the 1,000 pastors that were surveyed. We like control and security as humans too, don't we? Again, nothing wrong with these things at all. However, when they take the place of God, that's when they have become an idol in our heart. Do you want to take a guess at what number three was? Number three was money at 13%. And if you haven't gone back and listened to our money episode from last week, I encourage you to do that. And then political power and social influence followed in fourth and fifth place, respectively. So when we look at these numbers, as we will leave all of the links to these data points in the description below, but when we think about all of this, what does it mean? It means that the most spiritually dangerous thing competing for the hearts of American Christians, but also Christians around the world, it's not drugs, it's not pornography, it's not violence, it's comfort. It's the desire to feel safe and secure and undisturbed. That is what the church is losing people towards. Now, when's the last time that you've heard your pastor or heard a message preached about the dangers of comfort, control, and security? I bet it would probably have been quite a long time ago, if you can even remember back that far. Now, take that into consideration with what John Calvin said, in the sense that the human heart is an idol factory. What is a factory? Well, it's made with the purpose of producing some sort of material or good. And if he says that the human heart is an idol factory, it means that the human heart constantly produces idol after idol after idol. And I think if for our 21st century Christianity, our idols have become comfort, control, security, money, and the list could probably go on and on. It's not making some sort of little statue, putting it up in our house and making a shrine out of it and bowing down and worshiping it at certain times of the day, like we might think that idols would be. Sometimes money can become an idol when we can't give generously because we want the bank account to reflect security in our lives. Now, why would we give up money if we lose a sense of security? I think it's at that point that then we begin to make money an idol in our own life. For comfort, what are you not willing to give up to God as an act of faith because it might cost you your current lifestyle? That we might to give up comfort to pursue God, but when we're not willing to give up comfort because we don't want to be disturbed with our current life. You've probably heard the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if we've given up comfort, in order to pursue after God, then we are essentially saying that, God, you are number one in my life. Now, let's flip that around. If we are unwilling to give up our current lifestyle in order to pursue after God, then where are we placing comfort as opposed to God? We've placed comfort at the point of it being above God rather than below. In fact, sometimes we might even make relationships an idol, where you won't tell the truth to someone you love because you need their approval more than you need to obey God. We can make relationships an idol. We can make our reputation an idol, whereas you won't speak up about your faith at work because you can't afford to be seen as one of those people in the workplace. And see, these are all different ways that we can make idols in our own life when we might think something other than that. We might think, well, that's not necessarily an idol, yet we have made it an idol in our own life. And here's the thing, idols in our life, modern idols are not announcing themselves. And what do I mean by that? Wakes up in the morning, gets out of bed, and says, today I'm going to worship money. Nobody says that. Yet our actions might say otherwise. You see, many times idols might creep into our life through gradual reprioritization, through slow drift, through a heart that has stopped putting God first and put other things first. That's how idols begin to creep in our life. Again, nobody wakes up and says, you know what, today I'm going to worship money, or I'm going to worship comfort, or I'm going to worship fill in the blank. But our actions might say something other than that. Our actions might say, you know what, rather than choosing to go to church, I'm going to go to work so that I can get more money, so I can buy a bigger house, or buy a nicer car, or buy whatever, fill in the blank. That's when those things have become idols in our own life. So the question is not whether you have an idol, talking about maybe a little golden or wooden or stone statue, or if the question might not be if you have made one of these things that we've already talked about an idol. The question is whether you're honest enough to claim it and to name it. Because how did we even get to this type of point? And let's be honest, there's three different things here that I have come to the conclusion on that have made modern idolatry almost inevitable in not only American Christianity, but Christianity around the world. And this, I would say, is probably most prevalent in first world countries, but I guess it's not necessarily something exclusive to that. And the first thing is this. The first thing is consumer culture. We've made a reference to consumer culture in several different episodes, but especially in first world countries. And with the rise of internet and social media and over consumerism and having an abundance, that consumer culture tells us constantly that we need more, that more is better. More money, more comfort, more security, more status, more followers, more options. It goes on and on and on and on. In fact, the entire economy is driven on this desire alone. You say, well, how can the economy of more followers and more options and more status be driven? Well, it might not be necessarily money economics, but it could be social economy, convincing you that you need these things. But in all reality, you don't actually need those things. Here's the thing. Contentment obviously goes a long way. We've already discussed that several times on the podcast. But companies know how to get you to go out and to purchase something that you saw an ad for. And let's be honest, at this point, we all hate ads. Nobody says, well, you know what? I like ads. Nobody says that. We instead ad blockers on our computers. We pay for things like YouTube Premium so that we don't get ads on videos. And we, in fact, pay more in our streaming services so that we don't get ads. And companies know how to make us feel like we need to go out and buy something or do something or whatever it might be, even whether you don't actually need it. What is the message that every screen, that every billboard, that every algorithm is telling you that you need this. That's why we have videos of people having over an abundance of whatever it might be. But in all reality, do we get so consumed and so caught up in those types of things that we have lifted them up to a point over God? And I think if we're honest with ourselves, I think sometimes we might have. That consumer culture has taught us that we need more and more and more and more and more. And then when we get more, it's, oh, we need even more on top of that. Have we given ourselves up to consumer culture? Have we made those things an idol in our own life? Number one. But number two, and this falls on the church. And again, I go back to, when is the last time you've heard a message in church that has talked about idols? You see, I think a second reason on how we got to this situation is that the church has stopped confronting those things. And we preach about love and grace and purpose, and those are good. Don't get me wrong. Church should be preaching those things. But many times we often rarely look someone in the eyes and say, what you are giving your heart to is an idol and it's killing your relationship with God. You know how I know this? I worked as a youth pastor for several years. And one thing I noticed is that when we took teenagers and juniors to camp and we took out the distractions like cell phones, the internet, TV, all of those different things, when we took those things out, even in just a couple of days, their relationship with God began to take an upward trajectory. You know why? Because we have removed those things, those idols from their life, solely focused on the word of God and the preaching of God and spending time with God, and their relationship with God flourished in just a couple of days. You know what that tells me? That tells me that not just teenagers, but people in general have made phones, the internet, and all of the different things that go along with that idols in their heart, and it's killing their relationship with God. And the church has stopped talking about that. And why is that? I think partly the reason might be is that we don't know how to answer that. We don't know how to confront people where they are at, let alone confronting people on what they have made an idol in their own life, like comfort, money, control, security, so on and so forth. That's how I think we get to a spot where you survey 1,000 Protestant pastors and they say that control and comfort and security and money are all the biggest idols in people's life. Nobody says that, you know what, the biggest idol that I am dealing with in my church's congregation is this little wooden statue. Nobody says that. Or a golden calf. Nobody says that anymore. At least not in Western civilization. But I think we are just not willing to come to the realization that our idols aren't little statues, but instead our idols are some of these things that we've already discussed. Number three, I think we've come to a spot where we have this Jesus plus problem. What do I mean by that? I mean, we've created this idea of Christianity that is not just God alone, but it's God plus whatever else I feel needed to complete myself. When in fact, in all reality, the Bible says something other than that, doesn't it? And we'll talk about that here in just a second. But we have felt like we need Jesus plus money to feel secure. We feel like we need Jesus plus the right relationship to feel complete. We need Jesus plus comfort to feel blessed in our life. And that's not the problem at all. You know what the problem is? That Jesus is not supposed to share the throne. He is supposed to have the sole throne and share it with nothing else. That's why I think we've got to a spot where we have all of these idols that many times we either, number one, aren't willing to admit, or number two, we don't even realize it. And here's the thing, Tim Keller said this. He says, think about whatever makes you anxious the most when losing it. What makes you the most angry when someone threatens it? What do you think about the most when your mind has nothing else to do? And those emotional responses reveal very quickly where your real worship is going, where your intended priorities are. Those questions will reveal who truly is number one in your life. Maybe as you think about those questions, you think about, yeah, there's something there that I have placed above God in my life. Now, let's see what God says about idolatry. And we know already, as we've already alluded to, that God does not share these verses very lightly at all. We've already alluded to this one. It's Exodus 20, verse number 3, which says, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." It's the very first commandment. Think about this. When Moses is getting the 10 commandments from God on Mount Sinai, what's going on down at the base of the mountain? They are doing exactly what God had just said for them not to do. And it's not the fifth commandment, it's not the 10th commandment. No, this is the very first commandment. And it is this: Thou shalt have no other gods before me. You know why I think God put this first? It's because I think he wanted this to be the foundation that everything else God asks from here on out of you is to assume that he comes first. Is there something that has taken God's priority in our life? In the Sermon on the Mount, Christ says in Matthew 6, verse 24, and we talked about this verse last week, but he says, "No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon." And we talked about this verse last week, saying that mammon is money. You see, Jesus says, you can't serve me and money at the exact same time. Now, that crumbles the idea of this Jesus plus problem movement. So, who are we serving? See, Jesus says you can't serve both. There's not a shortcut to where you can serve God and money at the exact same time. No, he says it is impossible. You will end up serving one or the other. The real question is, which one do you choose? And that's not an answer to a question that we make one time and then we'll never have any types of problems with it ever again. No, it is a question that we have to answer every single day. The question is this: who am I going to choose to serve today? Am I going to choose to serve comfort? Am I going to choose security? Am I going to choose money? Who am I going to serve today? Or am I choosing to serve God? Paul writes in Colossians 3, verse 5, "Mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, and covetousness, which is idolatry." It's interesting here that Paul calls covetousness idolatry directly. We talked a little bit about this in last week's episode. Idolatry and covetousness, that he ties these two together. It's rather interesting. And sometimes I think they are slightly related in the sense that if you see something on social media or a billboard or a ad on the internet or something like that, and you say, you know what, I really, really want that. The desire for more money, more status, more comfort, more of anything. But I bet nobody says, you know what I want more of? A deeper relationship with God. There's not too many people out there that say that. But when we have put covetousness and made it an idol in the sense that we want more and more and more and more and more, and the desire for that is more, it's not just a character flaw. It's not just something, yeah, you know what, I think I'll work on it when I feel like I'm good and ready. No, you know what it is? Paul says here, idolatry. And as we mentioned just a moment ago in Exodus chapter 20, what does God think about idolatry? He says that thou shalt have no other gods before me. So if it's a heart issue, then what do we do about it? What's the heart of the issue here? That money might promise security, but that's only going to be temporary. Sure, if you had lots of money, you might find some security in that, but ultimately, If God is our refuge and strength, where should we be going to find true, lasting security? Many times, the psalmist David wrote psalms like this that talk about God as his refuge. You know, when he was writing this, he was many times on the run from Saul, who wanted to kill him. Yet David can write something like, I'm finding security and comfort in God when I'm on the run for my life. Money can't promise that, can it? Sometimes we might go to relationships that promise unconditional love, but where is the only true place we can find unconditional love? It's not in a spouse, it's not in a relationship, but it's only found in God who loves us perfectly. For some people, they might find significance in their reputation and they might find worth in that, but only God defines your worth, doesn't he? He's the one who created you after all. You see, here's the thing. Every idol is actually a counterfeit of something that God truly offers. When people are learning to identify counterfeit currency, they don't give them counterfeit bills. Instead, they give them the real thing to be able to look over and be able to identify marks of the true bill so that when the fake things come, when the counterfeit bills come, they're better able to understand what makes it counterfeit. And when we put counterfeit things like comfort and control and money and other things like that to the spot over God, to where we expect those things to take place of the things that God has already offered us, we are settling for a counterfeit rather than settling for the actual genuine thing. And every idol will eventually fail to deliver. But you know what won't? It's God. Now, maybe you've identified something in your life that has become an idol. And let me start off by saying, what do we do about it? That this is not just something that people that sit in the pews week after week are dealing with, or something that people deal with who don't ever come to church. But I go back to that quote by Calvin, which said, the idol factory is in the human heart. And that's something that not just churchgoers deal with, but it's also something that your church staff deal with, that your pastor deals with. And it's not a thing about if my heart is an idol factory, then I must be bad. No, it reveals to us how good God actually is and how he deserves to be first. Remember that quote that I gave you from Tim Keller? That if something were to just disappear tomorrow, how devastated would we be? Take 5 minutes here and just think about and be real honest with yourself. What would devastate me if I lost it tomorrow? What do I spend my most mental energy about every single day? What do I sacrifice for time wise, money wise, attention wise? What makes me most anxious? And map out those things, because then those things will be able to identify what in your life has been an idol. If we're truly honest with ourselves and we go through those things genuinely, I think we might be surprised, but on the other hand, I don't think we will be surprised. And we might be able to identify what in our life is causing those things to be an idol and take the place over God. You see, you don't just dethrone an idol by trying harder not to think about it. Instead, if you're going to dethrone an idol, you got to replace it with something. And what better thing to replace it with than God? Because number one, God's not going to fail you. But in fact, he has promised in his word that he's going to give you refuge, that he's going to give you peace, that he's going to give you all of those different things. And when we begin to understand that, and when we begin to dig into God's word and find out that he promises those things and truly believe them, then our grip on those idols will begin to loosen more and more and more. And the best way to combat these idols is by not fighting it, but instead loosening our grip and gripping onto God's word. That's what's going to help us better overcome idols in our life. That's what's going to help us loosen the grip on things that we can control and instead rely on God for the things that He has already promised to us, like comfort many times, like peace, like security. And as we wind down this episode, I want us to think about this closing scripture here. And it's 1 John 5, verse 21, which simply says, at the end of the letter of 1 John, little children, keep yourself from idols. And this is the very last verse in John's epistle. And let's be honest, if you read it in context, it makes zero contextual sense at all. However, it's something that John addressed because he knew that people were having issues with it. He's saying here, keep away from those things. Don't allow those types of things to become an idol in your life. Now, in the historical context, yes, many of the Greeks and Romans, they worshiped their idols and things like that. And he's telling Christians to keep away from those things. But how do we apply that verse to our life? It's this: don't allow comfort, security, money, and the list goes on to be in a place that's over God in our life. Because when we are breaking commandment number 1, thou shalt have no other gods before me. When we place those things above God in our life and God is no longer our number 1 priority, that's when we've broken his first commandment. So what's become an idol in your life? Is there something that you think about that if it were to just disappear tomorrow, that I would be so anxious and distraught about? Is there something in your life that you know is an idol above God, but are not willing to admit it? Is there an idol in your life that you know you need to take care of, but you're afraid that if you take care of it, of what would the repercussions be? I hope I've given you some things to think about in this episode. If you haven't already, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening to the audio version, hit that follow button. You can follow us on Instagram at Sunday to Society, and you can like us on our Facebook page at Sunday to Society Podcast over there. I hope you have a great day, and God bless.